Most people think economic booms are a sign of success. They're not. They're a warning. When central banks push interest rates too low and flood the system with cheap money, they create an artificial boom. Jobs appear. Stock markets rise. Housing prices explode. Everything looks great until it doesn't. Because this kind of boom is not built on real savings. It's built on debt and distorted prices. And every single time, it ends the same way, in a crash. Today we look at why this happens, and why Roland Baader warned that the next one could be much worse. Let's start with something that sounds obvious but isn't. Not all economic booms are the same. Some booms are real. A country discovers oil. A new technology makes workers twice as productive. A generation of entrepreneurs builds products people genuinely want to buy. Real wealth gets created. Real living standards rise. The boom reflects something that actually happened. Then there are the other kind. The kind where the boom is not caused by new wealth being created, but by cheap money flooding the system and making everyone feel richer than they actually are. This is the boom the Austrian school has been warning about for over 100 years. And it always starts in the same place. A central bank that decides interest rates should be lower than the market would naturally set them. Here is why that matters. The interest rate is not just a number on your mortgage statement. It is a signal. The most important signal in any economy. When interest rates are high, the signal says, money is scarce. People are spending, not saving. Don't borrow unless you have a very good reason. Only the most productive projects get funded. When interest rates are low, the signal says, money is plentiful. People are saving a lot. Resources are available. Go ahead and borrow. Go ahead and build. In a free market, this signal is accurate. Low rates reflect real savings. Real people choosing to set aside income today so they can spend or invest it later. That saved money is the fuel for real investment. But here is what happens when the Federal Reserve, or any central bank, cuts interest rates, not because people are saving more, but because they want to stimulate the economy. The signal says, money is plentiful, but the underlying reality says, it isn't. Nobody saved more. Nobody produced more. The Fed just pushed a button and made borrowing cheaper. And what happens when borrowing gets cheaper? Everyone borrows. Businesses take out loans to expand. Developers borrow to build. Consumers borrow to buy. The economy starts humming. Unemployment falls. Stock prices rise. Real estate goes up. GDP grows. The headlines say, the economy is booming. And it is. But the boom is not built on real savings. It is not built on real productivity gains. It is built on cheap credit, money that was created by a committee decision, not by actual human effort and sacrifice. Mises called this the illusion of prosperity. Everything looks good. The numbers look great. But the foundation is not what it appears to be, and foundations eventually get tested. Here is where it gets really interesting, and where the Austrian school makes its most important contribution. When cheap money floods the system, it doesn't just create more activity, it creates the wrong activity. Think about it this way. A construction company is deciding whether to build a new apartment complex. At a 7% interest rate, the numbers don't work. The rents they could charge won't cover the cost of financing, so they don't build. Then the Fed cuts rates to 2%. Suddenly the numbers work. They build. But here's the question almost nobody asks. Should that complex have been built in the first place? Not, can we finance it? That's the easy question. The real question is there genuine long-term demand for it? Are there enough people who actually need and can afford to live there? At artificially low rates, that question gets skipped. Because at 2%, dozens of developers run the same calculation and all get the same answer: build, build, build. Not because real demand exists, but because cheap money makes otherwise bad projects look profitable. The Austrian school calls these malinvestments, investments that only make sense when interest rates are artificially suppressed and that reveal themselves as mistakes the moment rates return to normal. During these artificial booms, something strange happens. Entire industries and jobs appear that only exist because of cheap credit and distorted prices. The anthropologist David Graeber later called them bullshit jobs, roles that even the people doing them often feel are pointless. From the Austrian perspective, this is not random. It is the predictable result of flooding the economy with artificially created money. Labor and capital get pulled into activities that look profitable only as long as the cheap money keeps flowing. When the credit stops, those jobs are usually among the first to disappear. The classic example is the housing bubble of the 2000s. Between 2001 and 2004, the Federal Reserve cut the federal funds rate from 6.5% to 1%, the lowest level in 45 years at the time. What happened next was predictable. Mortgage rates collapsed. Home prices soared. Developers built everywhere: Las Vegas, Phoenix, Florida. Entire subdivisions in places that had no real economic reason to exist beyond one fact: money was cheap. By 2006, there were neighborhoods in Nevada where more than half the homes were investment properties, bought not to live in, but to flip. Condo towers in Miami were pre-sold to buyers who never intended to move in. Factories ramped up production of lumber, drywall, and copper wire to feed demand that wasn't driven by real population growth or household formation, but by the boom itself. And it wasn't just housing. In the late 1990s, dot-com companies spent billions laying fiber optic cable that carried almost no traffic. Enough cable was buried to circle the earth thousands of times. Most of it sat unused for years. Retail chains opened thousands of stores in markets that couldn't support them. Airlines ordered planes they didn't need. Universities expanded campuses funded by easy student loan money. These weren't random mistakes. They were the predictable result of a system in which the most important price signal in the economy, the interest rate, had been deliberately distorted. From the Austrian perspective, this isn't prosperity. It's a collective error, financed by the central bank, that only looks like growth until the bill comes due. Here's the part mainstream economists, the ones who advise governments and appear on television, consistently get wrong. They treat the bust as an accident, a shock, something that came from outside the system. The Austrian school says, no, the bust is not an accident. The bust is the system correcting itself. The boom created the problem. The bust is the solution. Brutal? Yes. Necessary? Also yes. Here's why. During the boom, resources got misallocated. Workers took jobs in industries that only existed because of cheap money. Capital poured into projects that would never have made sense at normal interest rates. Companies built entire business plans on the assumption that easy credit would last forever. When rates rise, or when the central bank simply stops flooding the system with new money, the math changes overnight. Those apartment complexes that looked profitable at 2% collapse at 6%. The developer can't refinance. The project stalls. The loan goes bad. The bank takes the hit. Factories that expanded to meet boom-era demand discover that real demand was never that high. They cut production. They lay people off. Asset prices that were inflated by cheap money fall back toward reality. Real estate drops. Stocks drop. Companies that were kept alive only by endless refinancing finally face the reckoning they spent years postponing. This is not a tragedy. This is information. Falling prices are the market's way of saying, those resources were wasted. Those workers need to move to industries that actually create value. That capital needs to be redeployed to projects with real demand. The bust is the economy cleaning up the mess the boom left behind, so that genuine, sustainable growth can begin again. It hurts, but it is necessary. And the faster it is allowed to happen, the faster the recovery. The Great Depression remains the textbook case of what happens when governments refuse to let the correction run its course. And here is where the problem gets worse. When the bust arrives, the last thing any government wants to do is let it run its course. The bust means rising unemployment, falling house prices, businesses closing, banks taking losses. None of that is politically convenient, so the response is almost always the same. Cut rates, again. Print money, again. Bail out the banks, again. Launch stimulus packages, again. The stated goal is to soften the landing and save jobs. The actual effect is to interrupt the correction before it can clear out the mistakes of the boom. Baader described this better than almost anyone. They put out the fire with gasoline and called it a rescue. Think about what that means. The boom created misallocations. The bust was beginning to correct them. Then the government steps in with more cheap money to stop the correction, which means the misallocations stay in place. And not only do they stay, they grow larger. Because the new flood of cheap money creates a fresh wave of artificial demand. New projects appear that only make sense at near zero interest rates. New debt structures form that can only survive as long as the central bank keeps the money flowing. When this new boom eventually turns, as it always does, the next bust is bigger than the last one. Larger misallocations, more debt, a system even more dependent on easy money. This is the ratchet effect. Each intervention makes the next one both more necessary and less effective. The 2001 recession was met with low rates, which helped inflate the housing bubble. The 2008 housing collapse was met with near zero rates and massive bailouts, which helped create the everything bubble of the 2010s. The 2020 crash was met with trillions in new money and zero rates, which inflated another asset bubble. And the 2022 correction was slowed by a quick return to easier policy before the cleanup was finished. Each cycle, bigger intervention, bigger bubble, bigger bust. Let's bring this all together into a framework you can actually use. The Austrian business cycle theory, which sounds complicated but isn't, says this: booms and busts are not random. They are not caused by animal spirits, or by greedy bankers, or by bad luck. They are caused by one thing: the artificial manipulation of interest rates by central banks. Here is the cycle in plain English. Step 1. The central bank cuts rates below where the free market would set them. Step 2. Cheap credit floods the economy. Businesses borrow and invest. The economy booms. Step 3. The wrong things get built. Projects that only work at artificial rates. Misallocations accumulate across the economy. Step 4. Reality asserts itself. Rates rise, or the money supply stops growing, or some external shock exposes the weakness. The bust begins. Step 5. The government panics. It cuts rates again and prints more money to stop the correction. Step 6. A new, larger boom begins, built on the unresolved misallocations of the last cycle, plus a fresh round of cheap credit. Go back to step 1. Repeat. Get worse. This is not a theory about one crisis. It is a theory about the structure of our monetary system. A structure that produces crises systematically, predictably, and with increasing severity over time. Mises wrote this down in 1912. In The Theory of Money and Credit, over 100 years ago. Every cycle since then, 1929, 1987, 2000, 2008, 2020, 2022, has followed the same pattern. Not because Mises was a prophet, because the mechanism he described is real. So where does that leave us in 2026? From 2009 to 2022, the Federal Reserve kept rates near zero for 13 years, the longest artificial boom in modern American history. In that time, the national debt went from $12 trillion to $31 trillion. The Fed's balance sheet went from $900 billion to $9 trillion. Asset prices, stocks, real estate, private equity, crypto, inflated far beyond any historical relationship to income. When rates finally rose in 2022, the correction began, then got interrupted. The Fed eased again before the cleanup was finished. We are now sitting on the unfinished business of the longest boom, with the political system already preparing the next round of intervention. Baader saw only one real way out: sound money. Interest rates set by the market, not by a committee. No central bank flooding the system with cheap credit. No safety net that protects banks from their own mistakes. He didn't call what was coming a recession or a soft landing. He called it a reckoning. The bill for 100 years of putting out fires with gasoline. What do you think? Are we closer to that reckoning than most people admit? Drop your take in the comments. I'll be reading them. And if this kind of analysis is what you're after, hit subscribe. More is coming.